Thank you. Hello, I'm Emily Stride.
And I'm Alice Brittain.
And we're here to share with you The Merry Wife of Wilton.
The reading you're about to hear is a play written by our late mother, the actress and playwright, Susan Sheridan.
You might know her as Trillian in The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, or even as the voice of Noddy.
The play was the result of many years of research. Mum was awarded an MA in Shakespeare Authorship Studies by London's Brunel University.
And we are here, as you know, as guests of the Francis Bacon Society, who supported Mum's MA studies. Our mother was, for many years, a very enthusiastic member and trustee of the Society.
She wrote and performed this play as a one-woman show. And while some of the material is imagined, the characters and the events are real.
In her lifetime, Mum spoke about adapting the play for two characters, Mary Sidney, Countess of Pembroke, and her maid, Anne. We are delighted, therefore, to present to you our reading of a first version of The Merry Wives of Wilton. Thank you.
Act 1. Afternoon. A desk and chair set with books and writing paper. There is a knocking at the door.
Oh, Anne, that'll be Dr. Lister, though he's unusually early. Let him in, will you?
It's not the doctor, milady. It's Lord Bacon's servant. He has a letter for you and says it is for the hand of the Countess Pembroke only. He is to await your reply and by your leave, ma'am.
Very well, show me the seal. Anne, give the man some ale. Nay, find him some broth to sup. This may take some time. Dear Lord Bacon, in code as always. How the devil am I supposed to decipher and reply while your messenger waits? You think I am still capable of deciphering your messages upon the inst, don't you, Francis? Well, I'm not. And which code is it, Francis?
Simple cipher, or simple Latin cipher, which isn't simple at all, or reverse, where everything goes backwards.
Ah, bilateral. I suspect this will be bilateral cipher, one of your favourites, and particularly tricky.
But it will be important. Anything that comes from Francis is important.
I just wish that sometimes he would write to me in plain English. I blame Walsingham, the spy master.
He made it popular with all the men.
Men love games. It's a boy thing. They love anything to do with numbers and codes, secrets and spies.
And of course, they were all spies.
My brother, Philip Sidney, included. He even married the spy master's daughter, making Walsingham part of the family. Philip, Francis Bacon, and his brother Anthony Bacon, and many of their friends, all went to the continent to work for Walsingham on the Queen's business.
On Her Majesty's Secret Service.
Anthony was there for 12 years. There was nothing he did not know about life in the French court of Henri Navarre. He sent it all back to us in cipher. This is how we passed much of our information. Over the years, Francis has passed me a good many secrets this way.
Some that shall never be unlocked, and some...
Well, who knows what might be divulged to you this very afternoon.
Mary first met Francis Bacon at Kenilworth in 1575. They were both 14.
I loved him immediately.
They had the same sense of humour, a sense of the absurd, and a love of language. English, of course, Latin, French, Greek, even Hebrew.
I was also learning Welsh. Well, I am of Welsh stock, you know. We Sidneys are descended from the bards of ancient times.
At 12, Mary, being a girl, was taught to sew, play the lute, and to sing. Francis, being a boy, was sent to university. Yes, he had entered Cambridge when he was 12 years old. He was courting controversy before his voice broke.
Aristotle has no meaning.
He hated Aristotle.
Why waste time on this outmoded philosophy? Plato is the only one.
He was a Plato man.
Plato, for him, told the truth. The love and philosophy in Plato's dialogues were to influence the whole of his life and our lives, for we would write about love in a way no one ever had before.
Plato's understanding of love. Love as a uniting force, a magnetic force, an energy that turns the earth on its axis.
We would write about the passion of love, the pain of love, the Promethean fire of love. Love is all that matters. Love is all there is. Shh. I have to be very careful who hears me say such things. It would not do to have a city father overhear my contentious views on the divine. Say one word out of place on the Holy Trinity and...
Let's go back to the safety of 1575.
I'm 14 years old.
It is a glorious midsummer night.
I've joined the court as a lady-in-waiting to the Queen alongside my mother, and we're on progress at Kenilworth.
Kenilworth Castle, where King Edward I played host to 100 knights and their beautiful damsels. Here, Arthurian legends were played out in romantic grandeur.
And now a new legend is being honoured. Our Queen Elizabeth, our own Gloriana, our very own Virgin Queen. This is her golden age, and she is so gracious. She is wreathed in smiles.
Poets speak verses to us as we pass. When we reach a torch-lit island, the Lady of the Lake appears in Arthurian garb.
Pass on, madame,
she calls.
You need no longer stand. The lake, the lodge, the lord are yours for to command. The Queen retorts from high up on her great white horse.
We had thought indeed the lake had been ours, and do you call it yours now? We will commune more with you hereafter.
Luckily, she is in good humour. She loves being pandered to. She adores being worshipped. She is like the moon goddess.
And no expense has been spared. There are fountains that pour forth streams of water in all colours, statues that come to life, jugglers, jesters, an Italian tumbler that astounds us with his acrobatic contortions.
Everyone is here. Foreign ambassadors and their wives, 17 barons and their wives, 14 earls and their wives.
Mary is introduced to a very jolly Earl, Sir Henry Herbert, 2nd Earl of Pembroke.
Surprisingly sprightly too, for a man of 40. Well, when you're 14, 40 seems ancient. Little did I know then that 2 years later I would become Sir Henry Herbert's 3rd wife.
But meanwhile, Francis Bacon is Mary's companion. He keeps Mary amused with his ready wit and good humour. Though only 14, Francis has written one of the masques to be performed here.
The Princely Pleasures of Kenilworth.
Written under a pseudonym, of course, the first of many.
This one was Lean Ham. The Princely Pleasures of Kenilworth by Lean Ham. It was the start of a number of bad jokes regarding ham, bacon, and the like, but was to lead to a far greater concealed name than we could have dreamed of then. He wrote,
Proteus appeared sitting on a dolphin's back. He sang to a lady and all the nymphs and gods of the sea.
What a foretaste to a future midsummer night play with Oberon, king of the fairies.
My gentle Puck, come hither. Thou rememberest since once I sat upon a promontory and heard a mermaid on a dolphin's back, uttering such dulcet and harmonious breath that the rude sea grew civil at her song, and certain stars shot madly from their spheres to hear the mermaid's music.
Good, isn't it?
Oh, the dancing has begun. The Queen loves dancing. She particularly loves dancing with Robert Dudley, the Earl of Leicester. But then she loves doing anything with Robert Dudley.
She made him Earl of Leicester and Master of the Horse, an ancient order of the highest degree, because she's so in love with him.
Any fool can see that. Some say she's actually married to him. Some say they were betrothed in secret when they were both young prisoners in the Tower together. They say a monk was smuggled in to join them in holy matrimony.
But that is simply not true. They were married at my parents' house in Penshurst Place in Kent. Oh, before I was born, of course, 1560. You see, Robert Dudley is my uncle. He's my mother's younger brother. My mother, in her position as lady-in-waiting, helped the course of love by inviting the Queen to Penshurst on several occasions. And on one of them, the Queen and Uncle Robert were wed in secret. 15 years later, Robert Dudley held this pageant at Kenilworth in order to woo Elizabeth into publicly acknowledging him as her husband.
She refused. How could she do otherwise? You see, Robert had already been married. His wife, Amy Robsart, had died under mysterious circumstances. She had fallen down the stairs. Or was she pushed?
The Queen was haunted by rumours of Robert's guilt, and so she never would publicly acknowledge their marriage. She decided she must remain the Virgin Queen forever. Virgin. Ha.
Eventually, Robert grew tired of waiting and, again in secret, married the lady-in-waiting Lettice Knowles. When Elizabeth found out, she nearly went out of her mind. He nearly ended his days in the Tower for it.
Of course, much later, another Robert did end his days in the Tower. Robert Devereux, the Earl of Essex. The Queen loved this Robert in a very different way, more as a mother loves a son, unconditionally.
But he turned traitor, and she had no choice but to have him executed for treason. It was the law.
But his death brought down that noble and ancient Welsh house of Tudor.
Let's move on to happier times.
My arranged marriage.
It's April 21st, 1577. Mary is 16 years old.
And very grown up. I, Mary Sidney, take thee, Henry Herbert, Earl of Pembroke, to be my lawful wedded husband.
Mary became Lady Mary Herbert, the Countess of Pembroke. Although Henry was considerably older than Mary, he was gentle and good and seriously rich.
My family, the Sidneys, were not rich. We may have mixed with royalty and had a fine house, but no money. Why, Uncle Robert paid most of my dowry.
Mary enjoyed married life.
Particularly playing hostess to a fine mix of visitors. My brothers, Philip, Robert and Tom, to the Queen herself.
Dr. John Dee, the Queen's astrologer, was also a frequent visitor. His assistant, Adrian Gilbert, lived there for a time.
From them, we learned the secrets of the stars, the mysteries of the universe, and the magic of alchemy.
They even had their own laboratory.
Adrian Gilbert taught me how to make a rather curious cordial, I remember. Well, it was more of a purgative, really. We called it Lady Pembroke's Vomit.
It was a concoction of roses, gillyflowers,
cinnamon, cloves,
peaches, scallions,
spices, herbs,
and unicorn's horn. You laugh, but it worked. It was designed to cure consumption, but it was in much demand to cure the pox.
And it made one go to the stool quite frequently.
Their country home was Wilton House near Salisbury.
Oh, I loved being the merry wife of Wilton.
Wilton is a fine, modern Renaissance house built by Henry's father and made from the ancient stone of the abbey that once stood here. It has huge glass windows letting in streams of sunlight.
I've never seen so much light. And at night, you can clamber up to the roof where there's a round observatory and gaze at the stars.
And the wide views across the fields to Wiltshire's River Avon.
I watch the swans fly overhead towards Salisbury Cathedral and beyond. Samuel Daniel called me the sweet swan of Avon. It's a very beautiful landscape.
It is a sacred landscape that stretches through Wiltshire to Somerset, mirroring the stars like an earthly map of the skies.
Some say ancient kings honoured their gods with processions across these lands.
Rather like the Queen on her progress.
Just north of here lies the battlefield where the great King Alfred saved England from the Danes. Here, you might say, England was created. Why are we telling you all this? Because it was here, in this sacred landscape, our idea was born.
Masterminded by her friend Francis Bacon,
Funded by my husband,
Mary and her brother Philip would gather together a circle of the greatest writers in the land and create a new forum for imaginative writing.
we would go further. We would create a new language with scores of new words. The French had done it. Why shouldn't we? We'd write poems, plays. We'd have our own golden age.
They called themselves the Areopagus and had other secret names like Emerito, which Francis had been called at university by his tutor, Gabriel Harvey.
Dr. Harvey joined our circle, as did Edmund Spencer, John Lilly, the gorgeous Michael Drayton. Come, let us kiss and part.
Oh, and Samuel Daniel, tutor to Mary's sons, the rather thrilling spy, Christopher Marlowe, and once he and Francis had settled their differences, the brilliant Ben Jonson.
I was the central figure, round everything spun, because the men were often abroad, spying. I was like the spider in the middle of the web. They would return laden with books from France or Italy or pamphlets hot off the press from Antwerp. We read everything we could get our hands on.
Poetry from the Pleiades, the French poets, Ficino's Latin translations of Plato, oh, and Plautus, the Golden Ass.
How we were inspired by these great works. We studied the sonnets of Petrarch, the odes of Ovid. We ploughed through Plutarch's Lives in Latin for our Roman history.
But it was from Greece that they took their muse.
Every writer needs a muse.
So they chose Athena, goddess of wisdom, who traditionally wears the helmet that makes its wearers invisible.
We would be those invisible poets. Poetry is not mere rhetoric or verse, said my brother Philip, but an art form of limitless scope. Limitless scope! We would embody in our work the same greatness as the epics of Greece and Rome, but in English. As Homer and Virgil gave the world knowledge, so would we, not for an age, but for all time.
Were they too arrogant? Did they aim too high? Did they fly too close to the sun?
For tragedy was to hit my family like a thunderbolt out of the sky. In May 1586, my father, Sir Henry Sidney, died quite suddenly from a fever.
He was so well loved. He had been a paragon of the court of King Henry VIII and a trusted intimate of his son, the sickly boy king, Edward VI.
My mother, my eloquent and noble mother, distraught and lonely, survived but a few months. She died that August. The once beautiful Mary Dudley, who'd had to live most of her life wearing a veil over her face in public.
She was disfigured through the dreaded smallpox caught when nursing the young Queen Elizabeth.
The Queen survived unscathed. My mother was cruelly scarred.
She had known other suffering. Her father, the Duke of Northumberland, and her younger brother, Guildford Dudley, were both executed for treason.
She had lost 3 children, my 3 sisters. I know how hard it is to bear, how the grief gnaws at you day and night. I too suffered the loss of a child, my daughter, my Catherine.
She died aged 3 years and 1 day.
I was pregnant, and the shock brought on labour. I gave birth to my second son as my daughter lay dead in her coffin.
A death and a birth on the same day.
Such a small coffin. My parents' deaths left me and my brothers like orphaned children, lost.
Then, in October the same year, Philip, garrisoned with the army in the Low Countries to defend the Dutch against the warring Spanish, was wounded during a most badly planned piece of army fieldwork.
He received a musket wound in the thigh.
Nothing grave.
The Earl of Leicester wrote when first we knew of it.
He will recover.
But he never did. The wound became infected.
They should have amputated, but it was too late. His blood was poisoned. It took him 2 weeks to die.
He was the wonder of men.
At his funeral, 700 mourners followed his body to St. Paul's Cathedral. So loved and admired was Sir Philip Sidney.
Oh, my dear brother, how I miss you. How I miss you still.
Philip's death was a turning point for Mary.
If I hadn't known it before, I knew now I had to write, if only for Philip. I was no longer content to be just the organizer, the patron. My husband could do that. I needed to be part of the team of writers, of good pens, as Francis called us.
Mary began by continuing Philip's unfinished work, his great epic Arcadia and his Psalms of King David. The Psalms were in sonnet form.
Oh, we were in love with sonnets. We were passionate about iambic pentameter.
Our English language lends itself so readily to that limping 5-beat rhythm. Philip was a fine sonneteer, as were both Francis and Anthony Bacon.
I, though a beginner, could give good alliteration. Listen to Psalm 58. Lord, crack their teeth. Lord, crush these lions' jaws. So let them sink as water in the sand. When deadly bow their aiming fury draws, shiver the shaft ere past the shooter's hand. Never say a woman cannot write as powerfully as a man.
Women, of course, are not allowed to write plays by law. It is illegal. Only poetry is deemed acceptable.
So I wrote a play in verse.
The Tragedy of Antony.
Not a brilliant play, but it was a political statement emphasizing the danger of succumbing to private passion. Rulers, kings must put their country first, else be party to that country's downfall.
Many of their plays would be like this, set in the past, but timeless in the knowledge they impart, the warnings they give. Take Richard II, also written entirely in verse, about a king who does not leave an heir. A usurper takes the throne. In Richard's case, Bolingbroke.
It was just too close to comfort for our queen, who had no heir. She was furious at the connotations.
"No, you're not, I am Richard,"
She hissed at Francis as she questioned him endlessly to find out who the author was.
He managed to put her off the scent.
Your Majesty, much of Richard II was taken from Tacitus. If there is any crime at all, it is that of plagiarism rather than treason, Your Majesty.
They managed to circumvent the problem this time. But if she had discovered the secret authors, she most certainly would have sent him or her to the tower.
Yes, anonymity was essential, not just because of the political content of our work, but because hands or ears could be cut off for speaking out of turn.
You see, the city fathers were all powerful. They were constantly trying to close all the theatres down and constantly succeeding.
They considered plays sinful. The Bishop of London used to preach,
"Plays are the cause of sin, and sin is the cause of plague. Ergo, plays cause plague."
We always had to keep one step ahead. I persuaded my husband to be patron of our very own troupe of players, the Earl of Pembroke's Men, a wonderful bunch of actors. I was in love with them all.
The actor-manager Richard Burbage protected the writer's anonymity by collecting and distributing the parts among the actors.
They never saw the whole play, only their own parts.
Actors only ever read their own parts anyway, so it doesn't much matter.
Yes, we are much indebted to Burbage for getting our plays put on in the playhouses, and to Uncle Robert for arranging performances at court.
Francis Bacon, being a lawyer, gave them access to the inns of court, particularly Gray's Inn.
All the while, the authorship was anonymous. Eventually, though, we knew we would have to give a name to our work, not an esoteric name, but a flesh and blood name. And the name came through our muse, Pallas Athena.
Like all brotherhoods, they encoded their work with certain devices. One was the use of watermarks. Another was the AA device.
We used a fanciful AA device on all our title pages.
AA are the first and last letters of Arcadia, Philip's great work. But even more significantly for the writing circle, it's the beginning and the end, the alpha and omega of Athena.
Pallas Athena, like our own Britannia, is seen to hold her spear, the spear of light, bringing enlightenment to the world. Pallas Athena means spear shaker. We were shaking the lance at ignorance, as Ben Jonson said.
Of course, they published under their own names as well. Mary Sidney, Samuel Daniel, Michael Drayton, John Lilly, Ben Jonson.
But for our finest, our most creative work, we used our chosen name, Shakespeare.
There was in the company an actor by the name of Will Shakespeare. So close a sounding name, they paid him a princely sum to use it.
He became rather rich. He bought himself a gentleman's title and a large house in Stratford. He became something of a moneylender, I believe. He died some 5 years ago now. I doubt he'll be much remembered.
Their first publication using the new spear shaker name was a Rosicrucian allegory of love and self-sacrifice.
Venus and Adonis by William Shakespeare.
This was entirely Francis's own work, entered at the Stationers' Hall just in time to be published on St. George's Day,
Thus linking us with the patron saint of England. It was perfect.
The first play they published openly using the name was Love's Labour's Lost, a shrewdly observed piece of French court life.
As sent to us in code by Anthony Bacon, but using Philip's heightened language.
And humour. Comedies were popular fare in the playhouses, from the bawdy comedy of errors to the teasing Twelfth Night.
In Twelfth Night, we make Viola dress as a boy. It's a device we use often to help our women challenge the prerogative of their men. Well, I know what you're thinking. It's because boys play the parts of women.
Yes, it's true, but it's not the reason. Cross-dressing gives greater freedom of speech.
Sadly, no woman can appear on a playhouse stage. No woman can be in an acting company, not even one's own.
Boys are trained in the art of speaking the metre for women's parts.
And we must accept this insult.
Only in masks may ladies appear.
We may pose and simper as Diana or Venus, but play real women, Cleopatra, Beatrice, Lady Macbeth.
Against the law.
Well, I got my revenge. I appeared on stage as a boy. It was dangerous.
You must tell no one.
I was smuggled in at Blackfriars during a production of Henry V.
I had already dressed Lady Mary in a doublet and hose, a cape over the shoulder, her hair hidden under a cap.
The boy who usually played the part was in on the jest and led me through to the tiring room when he and Anne went in with the groundlings to watch the fun.
She was to play the boy who translates for Pistol and the French prisoner.
Sir, this prisoner prays you to save his life, and for his ransom he will give you 20 crowns.
Tell him my fury will abate, and I the crowns will take.
Pour les écus que vous l'avez promis, il est content à vous donner la liberté.
Expound unto me, boy.
He esteems himself happy that he hath fallen into the hands of one he thinks the most brave, valorous, and thrice worthy Signor of England.
As I suck blood, I will some mercy show.
I had done it! I had appeared on stage, and no one ever knew, except the young lad, who was paid handsomely, of course.
Even the actor playing Pistol had no idea, thinking it was only one of the boys in the Blackfriars company.
I did well that night. Thank you, Francis, for arranging this piece of subterfuge. Oh, my lord. Dear Francis,
The message.
I must now concentrate on deciphering and decoding.
Forgive her a moment, please. It will be but a short while, and time enough to take a comforting posset. Ask the wench if she has some of Lady Pembroke's vomit.
It is worse than I thought. My Lord Bacon is in trouble. His reputation, his good name will be forever tarnished. I have deciphered thus far.
I was arrested 3 days ago by the king's men and taken to the Tower. I immediately requested of the king that I be released, and God be praised, I have been, though banished from London. I am writing this at Gorhambury and St. Albans.
And of what is he accused?
Not for decrying the Holy Trinity.
For that you are hung, drawn, and quartered.
Not even for being the secret author of bawdy plays.
He is accused of all things. Of bribery.
How wrong can they be, his accusers? This, the man who has a plate with money on so his servants may help themselves.
The most generous, the kindest man alive. We warned you, Francis. We, your friends, knew you might be at risk of some accusation, some charge trumped up by Lord Coke.
And his odious principal secretary, Winwood.
They are jealous of your rise to power under the king.
Why, when King James took the court to Scotland for 6 months, he put Francis in charge of running the country and gave him a knighthood.
They'll never forgive you for that, Francis. Was it not your friend Toby Matthew who sent the chilling coded message?
Beware, Francis. There are forces at work plotting your downfall.
You knew the danger you were in.
Francis had already played the sacrificial lamb for Queen Elizabeth during the Elizabeth trial, then saved the face of King James in the Overbury murder trial.
Oh, yes. This court is not above using a little poison to protect the monarch. Plenty of poison at court. Plenty of envy in the Privy Council. You once said to me,
Greatness is the mark and accusation is the way, but my ways are sound and good.
I know your ways are sound and good, Francis. I've known that for 40 years. So do your friends, your household, your good pens who write down every exquisite word you utter.
Why, there are those who carry pen and paper with them in his presence just to jot down anecdotes and bon mots.
But when your enemies are out to get you, They will stop at nothing to blacken your name. Yes, bribery may be afoot, but not from Francis.
Someone has been bribed to lie to the council.
Wiley Winwood has set this up.
One would hope that the king might protect rather than condemn Francis, who has protected him through thick and thin.
Ungrateful king, ungrateful Buckingham, through whom all things must pass.
He has entirely usurped the running of the country. You cannot get to the king without referring to Buckingham first.
I wish to God the king had never met him. But for that I am partly to blame.
For it was Mary's younger son, Philip, who introduced them to each other at her London home, Baynard Castle.
Philip, though I'm ashamed to call him my son, knew full well James's propensity for beautiful, long-legged men.
He was given a title in payment for procuring Buckingham. He was made Earl of Montgomery.
For playing the pimp. And, while I have the bit between my teeth, my eldest, William, has been made Lord Chamberlain. Ha! A suitable candidate as arbiter of good taste? I think not.
He who has gotten Mary Fitton with child and is even now conducting an affair with Mary's niece, Mary Roche.
I cannot describe my ill humour with those boys, my sons. Their father would turn in his grave.
Poor Henry.
At least he has not had to suffer the indignity that my sons have put us through.
Nor had to suffer the wantonness of our fickle Scottish king and his steenie, as he calls Buckingham.
Steenie? Why, it's enough to make one a Puritan. When I think of the indignity that his wife, the Queen, has had to endure. James is not a bad king.
He's a gifted man, highly educated and exceedingly well-read.
He's a great patron of the theatre.
He had the Globe rebuilt after the fire, where even now his players, the King's Men, are admirably performing The Winter's Tale.
It's in stark contrast to what's on next door at the cockpit. The Wisdom of Dr. Doddypole. It's not one of ours. At least I hope not. I must check with Francis. Francis, you're no longer here.
Francis used to live so close, just along the river.
I have it. The answer is simple. I shall reply to the letter in person. I will ride to St. Albans this evening, Anne, and his messenger shall accompany me. I must write an apology to Dr. Lister.
Dr. Lister is Mary's good friend and now her companion.
He and I are about to travel to the Low Countries together, to Spa, where we take the waters.
They go there quite regularly for their health. They say the waters keep you young and healthy.
Well, when your companion is a younger man, you need all the help you can get. There, I am sure Dr. Lister will forgive the unforeseen delay. You know, one of the reasons that Francis's name is being blackened is because he was part of the prosecution at the trial of Robert Devereux, the Earl of Essex.
You see, the Earl of Essex was, after the Earl of Leicester, the greatest love of Queen Elizabeth's life.
But he was rash, arrogant, and headstrong. And in 1601, the young man foolishly attempted to gain power for himself by marching through the streets of London trying to gather forces. He was hotspur, hot-headed and full of bravado.
Maybe he thought he was the rightful heir to the throne. He says he was just trying to protect the Queen from her sycophantic frontsmen, Lord Cecil and Lord Coke.
But this rebellion had all the makings of treachery. He was arrested, of course, taken to court, and found guilty of treason along with his small band of supporters.
Francis was, at that time, a member of the Privy Council, and the Privy Council naturally has to take the side of the Crown.
Francis pleaded with the Queen to be excused this particular trial, but she refused.
He was forced to be part of the prosecution council at the trial of his good friend, the Earl of Essex.
Some never forgave Francis for that, calling him a hypocrite. But he had no choice. He had no choice. What could he do?
They all tried to warn Essex that he was becoming too headstrong, too incautious.
Why, one night he had marched straight into the Queen's bedchamber and drawn his sword in front of her.
Anyone else would have been hanged for that.
And what did he do? He boxed his ears. She boxed his ears like a naughty schoolboy.
It's no wonder Essex thought the Queen would forgive him almost anything. He thought he was immune from danger.
I'll tell you a story. Some years before, the Queen had given him a ring.
With the advice that if he were ever to find himself in trouble, if ever he were to find himself in danger, he must find a way of getting the ring to her.
They never thought the danger might come from her.
So here he is, languishing in the tower, awaiting execution, surprised and horrified that things have gotten so out of hand, when he remembers the ring.
He must get it to the Queen. It's the only thing that might save his life.
He throws the ring from his prison cell to a lad below and tells him to get it to the Queen. The boy, of course, has no access to the palace, so he gives it to a lady in waiting.
Unfortunately, this lady in waiting happens to be the wife of Charles Howard, the Earl of Nottingham, and an enemy of Essex. He advises her to keep the ring.
So Elizabeth never receives this all-important love token. She assumes that, as well as behaving treasonably, his heart has hardened against her.
There is a trial. He is found guilty and sent to the block.
It broke her heart. Some 2 years later, this Lady Nottingham is seriously ill. She's dying. Her conscience is pricking her. She calls for the Queen.
Your Majesty, I was asked to give you this ring by my Lord of Essex when he was in captivity. I thought it too pretty to give away, and I kept it. Will you forgive me?
With a cry, the Queen took the ring. So he had tried to get it to her. He had loved her after all. He was asking for her help, for her forgiveness even. And she, thinking him treacherous, had sent him to the block. Now this lady in waiting she'd thought was her friend was asking forgiveness?
The Queen stood imperiously over the deathbed.
God may forgive you, madam, but I never shall.
The Queen returned home to Richmond Palace, but life was no longer worth living. She stood for days, not sitting, not lying, finger in her mouth, suffering, tormented, unloved. The lingering torture of a broken heart.
With Queen Elizabeth's death came the end of an era, though it was the demise of Essex that caused Mary and the writing circle much suffering.
My husband, deeply distressed by Essex's maddening behaviour and the ensuing trial, simply stopped living. He chose to die.
Mary's son, William, became the 3rd Earl of Pembroke, and Wilton House became the son's property.
I was no longer the merry wife of Wilton.
Anthony Bacon had also died, of grief, it is said, at the death of Essex. Francis, deeply affected by the Essex tragedy, now had the loss of his beloved Anthony to bear.
And I, the death of my husband.
Not surprisingly, the writing of the circle, now based in London, took on a darker, more tragic tone. This was the time of Othello, King Lear, the deeply disturbing Measure for Measure.
A title Anthony had given us.
All that was 20 years ago.
And since then, much has happened to cheer us, not least the opening up of the Americas. And we all have shares in the Virginia Company.
Their most recent play, The Tempest, conjures up such a brave new world. Prospero and Miranda will join the myriad of characters in the Folio.
Yes, we are planning a folio.
In which all the plays shall be published, including some that have never been seen before.
In thanks for the generosity of my husband, it will be dedicated to our sons, the Earls of Pembroke, William and Philip, the incomparable brethren. Do they deserve such an honour? It is the greatest honour of my life to have been involved in this work. How my beloved brother would be proud of me. Poetry is not mere rhetoric or verse, but an art form of limitless scope. And so it is.
His heightened language with rhythm and pace, pattern and rhyme has given rise to a collection of works as yet unparalleled in the English language.
Can you bear one more secret? A secret even greater than Shakespeare?
No, we can't.
No. Oh. Well, perhaps. Seeing as he asked for it. If we are briefed. Francis is not a Bacon at all. He was taken as a newborn babe by Lady Bacon, who served the Queen, and was brought up in the Bacon household.
Sir Nicholas and Lady Anne lived in York House, adjoining the Queen's palace at Whitehall, and Francis spent much of his youth at court, observing, watching, learning.
The Queen called this clever boy her little Solomon, and she and Robert Dudley took him often with them on royal progresses. This is how we met at Kenilworth.
But who was his mother? Who the father? You may have already guessed the truth. This beautiful, clever boy was none other than a royal prince, the son of the Queen herself and Robert Dudley.
He should have been the Prince of Wales. He should have been heir to the throne.
But she never acknowledged him as her son. She was the Virgin Queen, and virgins do not bear children, with one notable exception.
So, with the help of Anne Bacon and other ladies in waiting, she had managed to keep not only the birth, but the pregnancy a secret.
Though rumours were rife that there was something more than petticoats underneath her farthingale back in '61.
Francis discovered the truth in a hurtful way.
It was blurted out in his hearing one evening by a petulant maidservant.
Disbelieving, he ran to Lady Bacon and begged for the truth. She told him everything.
How the Queen had given birth, how the newborn babe had been placed, still bloodied, in a painted circular box and smuggled from the palace to York House in the dead of night.
Sir Nicholas Bacon and Lady Anne vowed to bring him up as their own son, and he was loved as their own.
The Queen was furious that Francis had discovered the truth. The following week, he was sent away to France, to the court of Henri Navarre.
He was 18 years old, and this was when he fell passionately in love with Marguerite of Navarre, the Dark Lady of the Sonnets.
When Sir Nicholas died, Francis was recalled to England, but not a penny was left to him in the will. He had to make a living like a commoner.
He chose the law, but he had no love of lawyers.
"Let's kill all the lawyers," he wrote in Henry VI.
All he ever wanted to do was write.
Well, now in exile, he can. His great inspiration will culminate in the publication of this folio.
All our dreams and aspirations that began life at Wilton House, the Areopagus, the circle of writers, good pens, will all be together under one name.
William Shakespeare.
I just pray that those who come after us will recognize the truth. And then our work, our great work, will not have been in vain.